All right, Hansel, you're up.
All right, are we going? Should I jump right
Yep,
into
we
it?
are live.
All right, we are live. Well, it looks like people are joining already. That's awesome. So let's jump right into it. So, hey, everybody, my name is Hansel. I am the founder and CEO of the Coder School. I'm super excited to be welcoming you guys here to our very first in our series of webinars about going to college. And so I want to kick this off by telling you guys a quick personal anecdote, which hopefully some of you folks will relate to. I myself am a parent, like many of you guys. I have one in college, one is a high school senior, one is a high school freshman. And so rewind back a couple years when I was first doing my college applications for my oldest, and I had a choice to make. Do I go with a college counselor or do I not? At the time, I decided not to because I was like, oh, hey, there's this thing called Google out there. Hey, I'm a kind of a smart guy. Maybe I'll just figure it out myself. And so I did it myself. And how did that go? Well, she didn't get into any of her top choice colleges. So it did not go that well. And as I look back, right, I see all of these nuances of college applications. Do you take the ACT or do you take the SAT? Because they're pretty different. What are the classes that you take if you want to be in computer science? And do you even mark down you want to be in computer science? Because that might make it harder to get into certain schools. And there's a lot of these things that I just simply didn't know. And now I don't want to make it sound like a sob story. She's at a great school now. She's going to NYU in Shanghai, getting a computer science degree. And so as a dad, I'm super proud of that. But I feel like we got lucky because I also, as a dad, regret that I didn't know a lot of this information, when I was helping her out. And so when our second kid was going through it, who is, as I mentioned, a senior, he is a senior now in high school. We just went through it a couple of months ago. He decided to apply early to WashU in St. Louis, my alma mater. And lo and behold, I'm super excited to say that he actually got in. And so for the parents out there who haven't gone through this yet, if you guys get into early decision, it is the best feeling in the world because you get your Christmas break and everything is so chill and you're not yelling at them to get their essays done, late December. But I attribute a lot of that to Collegewise because for our second one, we got Collegewise as our college counselor. And the fact is they gave us so many great recommendations. They reviewed his essay. And I think to me, they really helped him put his best foot forward in order to be able to get into his top choice college. So I was really stoked about about that, and that is what made me think, hey, is this something that if Collegewise did this for me, is this something that I could roll out to my coder school parents? I know a lot of coder school parents are into education. That's why you like to code in the first place, and so why not put this partnership together? Right. So now, before I flip it to Kevin, who is the Collegewise founder here, I did want to throw this slide out here because it is all about computer science. That's what I know. I don't know anything about college. So with computer science, I don't want to go over this slide in full. There's a lot of great info here, though. It is on our website, Coder School, if you go there. But basically, if you apply to be in computer science, sometimes it can be harder than applying not in computer science. And because it's a hard field to get into, there's a lot of demand for it. And so you'll see some numbers here for some of the top schools. And again, I won't go into it. I'm sure we could put on a whole separate webinar. We probably will about strategies here. But I did want to talk about this last line here because it's a great segue into introducing Kevin. So this last line, University of Washington. So if you're out of state and you want to go to UW, and you apply normally, I guess, it's a coin flip. It's 46% acceptance rate. But if you're out of state and you want to get there in their computer science program, it is 2%. Folks, that is a big difference in numbers, right? And to put things in perspective, that is harder than getting into Stanford. That's harder than getting into Harvard, MIT, any school. There's no school that has a 2% accept rate right now. So it is one of these things that I call essentially a crazy stat. And whenever you see crazy stat, I think to myself, can I get an expert to help me out with these kind of things? And that is the segue right into my man, Kevin, who has been doing this for, man, a quarter of a century now, right? Something like that. So
Yeah.
take it away, Kevin. Let's hear it.
Thanks so much, Hansel. This is great. I barely have to introduce Collegewise. That's the best introduction to Collegewise I could have possibly done. Yeah, my name is Kevin McMullin. I'm the founder of Collegewise. This August, Collegewise will be celebrating our 25th birthday. So yeah, I've been at this for a quarter century, and unless the company decides they've had enough of me, I will be the only one of my group of friends in college, and really of anyone I know who sort of is doing the old school thing of choosing one company to go to work for and staying there for 30 years until they retire. So I'm hopeful that's how this works out for me. College-wise, we really have three jobs here. Hansel just did a perfect job explaining the first one. Families hire us to guide their kids through the college application process. The second job we have is we work closely with schools and school districts who will bring us in to do things like application boot camps for their students to help them with their applications and essays. Sometimes we'll come in and do professional development for their staff, their counselors, and or their teachers. And we've seen a big increase in that in the last couple of years, and we really enjoy doing that work. It gives us a chance to access more students, more faculty, and make a real impact on the world of college admissions, which is really the third part of our job. We want to do as much as we can to share as much good information with as many people as possible about getting into college, whether or not they decide to hire us through a school or as an individual. So some of the ways that we do that are, for example, we work with Michelle Obama's Reach Higher organization, which helps first-generation kids get into college. But we also do a lot of our own webinars like this one for people that have come to know us and are part of our audience. And then really the most enjoyable ones that we get to do are when we partner with an organization like theCoderSchool, when we can say, hey, we've got similar audiences who have similar interests, questions, and concerns. Let's come together and just share good information with them. So that's really our only objective tonight, is to give you good information. When I say good information, there's a lot of bad information out there about getting into college. Getting into college is one of the few things in life where people get all sort of unsolicited advice from people who are not experts. Like, people don't take medical advice from their neighbor, right? And you'd be really careful about taking a stock tip from someone that has never traded stocks. But really in college admissions, there's a lot of hearsay, there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lot of rumor, and it's almost like a game of telephone where things get passed around, and eventually the message that maybe that person who says, "Oh, I heard about this when I went and visited, Columbia in New York City," maybe they really did hear about it, but they heard about it and now are translating it in the wrong way and giving it to you in the wrong way, or they heard about it from a friend who actually went there. So anyway, we want to do our best to share information that's accurate and helpful to help families make good decisions as you're doing this educational planning. Much like Hansel, I am also a parent. Unlike Hansel, my kids are 9 and 6, so I'm dealing with very different challenges right now than most of you are for parents in our audience with teenagers. I'll inevitably be seeking advice from you in just a few years from now. Right now, I have no idea what I'm doing. We're all just doing our best. But it has really informed my work here at Collegewise because I understand, and I'm talking to parents right now because almost always when we do these webinars, most of the audience is comprised of parents. If there are any students here watching this, you are welcome to be here. But when I'm talking to the parents and using my voice towards them, that's why I'm doing that. I now understand as a parent more than I ever did before. First of all, there's no operation manual issued on day one of this job, right? We're all just kind of figuring it out as we go as parents, trying to do the right thing. And that's why the college admissions process, or it's one of the reasons why, can be so overwhelming and create so much anxiety for parents, because you feel this enormous sense of responsibility to guide this human that you've raised since they were an infant, and they're on the edge of stepping out of your house and going to college. But yet, it's become so complex. It's become so mysterious what the process is like. And it's why so many people seek us out. You certainly don't have to work with a college counselor to get into college today. Plenty of kids do that by working with their school counselor, accessing good information on the internet. But then parents who have the resources many times will just say, I want to entrust an expert with this. It's much like you can do your own taxes, and lots of people do. Some people say, I don't want to risk screwing this up. I want to give this to somebody else who does this for a living. So whenever we do presentations like this, I really like to acknowledge two realities of college admissions, and most people are only aware of the first one. The first reality is everything you hear about getting into college today is bad news, right? When you look in the press, depending on where you go to, where your kids go to school, what you hear in your student communities, it's all this bad news about how it's getting harder to get in every year. Oh, I heard about this kid with straight A's and they'd done 100 hours of community service and they had, they were busy all the time and they had all this impact that they made and these awards and these honors, and they have a certificate proclaiming that they invented the proton when they were 14, and that kid went 0 for 12 in college admissions and didn't get in anywhere. A lot of times those stories are exaggerated, but a lot of times they're not, because there is this group of schools, and it's the famous schools that everyone has heard about, where that bad news is true. The actual reality of getting into college today is not bad news, and it has never been bad news. The reality is that there are thousands of four-year colleges in the United States, and this surprises a lot of people. If you look at the average admissions rate, you crunch all those numbers with all those 4,000 colleges, they accept on average 2/3 of their applicants. So the answer to the question, is your student going to go to college, is almost certainly yes. The only question remaining is which one. And I love the visual of this, that when you look at the kids applying to college today, well, it's a tiny slice of those schools, or rather, we look at the number of colleges in the country, it's just a tiny slice of them that are taking fewer than 20% of their applicants. And those are all the most famous colleges, like the Ivy League schools and Duke and Georgetown and Northwestern, the schools that most people have heard of. And then you go to colleges accepting 30 to 40%, that's a bigger slice. And then you get to colleges accepting more than half their applicants. So that is an overwhelming amount of good news. This next thing I'm going to say is an entirely different webinar topic, but I absolutely have to say this out loud. We've been doing this for 25 years, folks. We've had more than 30,000 students go on to college. And I promise you, because we keep track of what happens to them, a lot of them like to stay in touch with us. In the United States, where you go to college is much less important than what you do while you are there. You do not have to go to a famous or a selective college to be a successful, happy adult in the United States. I acknowledge there are countries where that is absolutely not true. There are countries where if you do not go to a particular university, your track in life is kind of dictated for you. The United States doesn't work like that. We've got nothing against the highly selective colleges at Collegewise. Many of our counselors here attended those schools. Lots of our students go to those schools. Even more of our counselors actually worked in those schools. But we've also sent students to hundreds and hundreds of other colleges where they've communicated with us and told us how great the experience is and how great the teaching is and the impact the professors are making on their lives and what they're learning and the internships they're getting. And we have seen absolutely no difference in the success and happiness post-college for the kids that went to the uber selective schools versus the kids that didn't go to those schools. So I do encourage families to think of this like a choice, that you can sort of make the decision that, well, we are going to focus only on the most selective colleges, and we are going to use an admission to one of those schools as sort of the measure for whether or not all the work our student did in high school is ultimately worth it. It is your choice as a parent if you want to treat the process that way. That's sort of putting yourself in one camp. You're putting yourself in the bad news camp, where it will be, it'll likely be anxious. It'll produce, a lot, I won't say confusion, but it'll inject a lot of anxiety into the process, because that's where all that bad news is true. The second camp you could take, and you have this option, is to say, college is important, but it's just one step on an ultimately much longer life for a student. So we want to treat this seriously. We want to make sure that we don't make mistakes that we could have avoided. But we've raised a good kid, and we've raised a kid that we believe in. And as parents, we know we're not going to be here forever. And I need to know that my kid is going to be okay. But you could say, I believe in them. And as long as they go to a college where they can be happy and successful, and then most importantly, work hard and take advantage of the opportunities that college gives them while they are there, you will see a really good return on your investment, both financially and emotionally for students. And that puts you in a very different camp, where you can actually enjoy this process and watch this. As I said before, the human you have raised from infancy, they are on the edge of taking their first step into adulthood. And the parents that treat it that way, they experience a much different process, and their kids experience a much different process. It's not for us to tell you which camp you should pick. You know your kids best, and maybe your kids want to go to these schools, in which case you want to support those goals. We have lots of parents who say to us, we're not pushing her. She's the one who's always gotten straight A's, and we tell her that she should do less, but she wants to go to one of these schools, and so we're going to support her. It's great that parent is listening to their student, but I just want to acknowledge at the beginning, you do have the choice, and you should consider the choice in what's going to be best for your family. Now, given that you've heard all this bad news, I do want to, because everybody seems to hear the bad news, and a lot of you, I'm guessing, because you're interested in computer science, you're interested in STEM, that almost always ties to students that are serious about their academics. They're already thinking about their futures, and naturally, many of those families are already thinking about the more selective schools. So I want to talk in a little more detail about this bad news. What is it all about? Why is all of this happening? Why has it gotten so hard to get into these colleges that so many people want to go to? Well, there are really three things that are happening. And the first is probably the least surprising one. The application volume to colleges keeps increasing. That last year, 15 million applications were submitted. 2 years ago, it was 13.5 million, and 5 years ago, it was under 10 million. So anytime you have a lot of people trying to go to a similar place, it's going to be harder to get there when there is a crowd. This will be my last mention of the camps and the choices you can make, but just remember, it doesn't have to be this way. You could decide, we don't need to follow all those crowds, or we're going to apply to a few of those schools, but then we're going to explore these other colleges where great educations and experiences take place. But the first reason about all this bad news is just the volume keeps going up in terms of applications. The second is related to that. The demand is outpacing the supply. I was an English and history major in college, and I took one economics course. I'm not going to tell you what grade I got in that course, but I do know what supply and demand is. That in this case, supply is how many seats are available at these colleges, and the demand is how many students are applying. Here's the thing most people don't know. The actual number of kids applying to college, the total number, has not changed in the last 5 years. The application volume is going up because that same number of students is submitting or are submitting more applications. And here are the two punchlines to this. They're submitting more applications to the same 50 schools. And this is especially true for computer science and engineering majors. So that's why you will see at those schools many times the admissions rates are even lower for the computer science and engineering majors. And it just sort of exacerbates that bad news. But that's another example of how this bad news is not true for the college admissions process in general, for college educations in the United States. So much of this is families creating headwinds for our own fire here. You've got more kids applying to more colleges, mostly all the same 50. That's driving the admissions rates down. And it sort of creates this doom loop where you hear all the bad news over and over again, and the kids keep reporting the bad news when the results come back. So sort of balance that reality with the reality of how many colleges are actually out there. And then finally, the other thing that is really impacting admissions, particularly at these very selective colleges, is that yields are becoming more difficult to predict. Most of our counselors have worked in college admissions at some level, and many of them have worked in these highly selective colleges, and they talk about what it meant to try to predict a college's yield. I like to explain it this way. Imagine you're hosting a wedding. You have 100 seats for guests at this wedding, and you'd like them all to be filled. You want to make sure, like, hey, I care about my kid. I really want a lot of people at this wedding. How many people do you invite to get those 100 seats filled? Because not everybody is going to say yes. You're going to get people who express regrets, say, sorry, I can't make it to the wedding. If you don't send out enough invitations, well, you're not going to fill all the seats. You send out too many invitations, you're going to have too many people there, and you're not going to have seats for all of them. So you have to do this guessing game of how many people do we think are going to say yes when we send this invite. Colleges have to do the exact same thing. They have to try to predict how many kids do we need to admit to fill our freshman class. What are the penalties for getting that wrong? Well, for example, at UCLA in 2020, they ended up having 400 kids too many say yes. They got 400 more. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'd love to come than they were expecting. And that changed their yield by almost a full percentage point. Why is this so important to understand? Well, when that happens at a school like UCLA, they don't have enough beds to put those kids in. They don't have enough seats in the classroom to put those kids in. What they have is 400 kids too many. And the way that they balance that out is by taking even fewer kids next year, because we need to try to keep the overall population of the college at the population that the college can manage. And so you have these three different factors, all of which are particularly true at the highly selective colleges. That's what's driving this bad news that you're hearing about. And this is an example of the type of thing that we really want to share when we do these presentations, to give people the truth about what is actually happening, so that you can make appropriate planning choices for your family and for your student. So when you see these realities, whether or not you are a family who chooses to live in Camp 1 or Camp 2, whichever choice you make, I want to share 3 effective strategies for 2024 that you can use that will improve your students' college admissions experience and will improve their college admissions results, no matter what colleges you want them to apply to. There is not a single college in the country that would look at a student who did these 3 things I'm about to describe and say, ooh, you made a bad choice there. You should not have done that. We're going to penalize you by saying no. I want to acknowledge some of you might know a lot about getting into college. Sometimes we have school counselors on these webinars as well who know as much or more than we do about getting into college. Most of what I'm sharing here is not new advice. It's always been a good idea to put sunscreen on. There's never been a time when it wasn't a good idea to put sunscreen on. It's just sort of become something that in the last 20 years, you have a lot more dermatologists saying, no, really, you need to do this. You're putting your health at risk if you don't do this. So what I'm sharing here these are not groundbreaking secret college-wise strategies. We have some of those too, but these are the core, and we advise all of our students of these strategies when we're working with them. And I want to go through each of them and give you just a few examples of what this looks like. So, well, you hear people talk about getting into college today, and they talk a lot about a student's GPA, their test scores, and their activities. Those tend to be 3 sort of core elements of getting into college. And I want to talk about the activities for a minute. My first piece of advice is for a student to consider pruning their activities. What exactly do I mean by that? The counselors at Collegewise will tell you, and I'm guessing many of you as parents can see this in your own kids, that we have a generation of overscheduled kids these days. We have a lot of students who say from the time they wake up in the morning until the time they go to bed, often at an alarmingly late hour, their time is spoken for. They don't just have school, they've got the early class before school, and then they've got the meetings during school at the lunch break, and then after school they've got their sport or their volunteer commitment or their martial arts class, and then they have their tutor, and then they have their test prep, and then they have to get home and do homework and study, and the whole day is just full. And a lot of those students are loading up on multiple activities in the belief that that's going to help them get into college. But getting into college is not predicated on having a long list of activities. And what I encourage students to think about is you can't say yes to one thing without saying no to something else. And when I say that, I don't mean a quid pro quo. Like if you say yes to this, you have to say no to this activity. I'm talking about it as a reality. If I say to my wife, I want to go out to dinner tonight, I'm saying yes to going out to dinner, and I'm saying no to eating a home-cooked meal at home. So for a student, they might say, yes, I'm going to take that karate class after school, but that means I'm going to say no to playing on the soccer team because I'm going to do this thing over here. Or it might be, yes, I'm going to add yet another AP class, and I'm going to say no to going to bed at 10 o'clock. And instead, I'm going to go to bed at 11 o'clock or midnight or later than that. It might be, yes, I'm going to do this activity after school, but no, I'm not going to spend that time with my friends or my family. So that is a reality when you say yes to anything. And students should ask themselves, what am I saying no to when I say yes to this? And for many students, when they start to look at their list of activities and they sort of put this in place, they say, I feel like some of these maybe I don't need to do anymore. And I called it pruning because, and I actually looked this up, I am not a gardener at all, but pruning, the actual definition of pruning is the targeted removal of diseased, damaged, dead, non-productive, structurally unsound, or otherwise unwanted plant material from crop and landscape plants. Why do gardeners do that? Because when they remove all of those bad, dead, unwanted, whatever they are, branches, the tree or the plant grows in a better, healthier way. Well, that actually works a lot the same way with activities for many students. I do want to acknowledge that for some students, they might not have the option of pruning an activity. Maybe you say, look, I'm a volleyball player. I play on a high school team that's going for the state championship. I want to get a college scholarship. I don't have the option to stop doing club volleyball or training with the volleyball team or the volleyball camps over the summer. And I'm choosing to do this because it's important to me. Or it might be the student who says, my parents own a business and I work in that family business after school every single day. And I also work at least one day on the weekends. And instead of paying me, that money goes back to, funding our family. So that's a student that doesn't have the luxury of saying, I'm going to do one fewer thing. But so to give you a rubric you can use here, no matter who your student might be and what their current commitments are, you should ask your students, first of all, do you enjoy participating? Not everything they do is going to be something they enjoy. That if the answer is no, it doesn't mean they have to get rid of this activity, but they should be saying yes to at least one of these questions. In fact, our counselors would tell you, Hansel has heard this from their counselor at Collegewise, when a student says, should I do this activity or that activity? Should I get a part-time job over the summer or should I go to this summer program at a college? Any activity choice, the first question we ask them is, well, which do you actually want to do? Because students tend to be more engaged and successful when they're doing things they want to do. So this has to be the first question. Do I enjoy participating in this? And sometimes we ask a student that question and they say, not really. That club meets once a week at lunchtime. We talk about the same things every week. We don't really seem to do anything other than meet. We've been talking about doing a fundraiser for the last 6 months. We still haven't done it. It seems like really this club only exists to meet. I'm not really enjoying it. Well, you're saying no to spending that lunch period doing something else, right? So we would encourage that student, if you're not enjoying it, consider pruning it and taking it off your list. The second question, are you able to make an impact? I'm going to use another tip later on to talk more about this element of impact. But what I want students to think about is when you are added to the mix of this activity, are you able to make some difference? Are you able to do something while you're there that would not have happened if you weren't there? And that might mean that you're leading a project. It might mean that you're bringing a certain energy to the group. It might be that you have an attitude that actually makes it better for everybody, or that you help recruit new members, or you might be the one employee at your part-time job who actually really treats this like something that's serious and doesn't find ways to slack off all the time. And your boss is saying, I really appreciate having you here. You make a huge difference on my crew. If you're not making an impact when you're doing something, ask yourself, is there an opportunity for me to make one? Or is that just the nature of what I'm doing here? And if so, am I okay with that? And then finally, does anyone benefit from your participation? So the example of the student that works in their family business, that student might say, well, I don't really enjoy participating. I'd rather be hanging out with my friends. And, I guess I'm making an impact on my family, but the actual job I'm doing there is one that we could technically hire somebody else to come and do, but someone is absolutely benefiting from my involvement here. My family is benefiting. So it might be the family member, or it might be the student that you're tutoring after school. It might be your little sister that you babysit after school because both of your parents work and this is how you're contributing. But if a student asks themselves these three questions about an activity and they don't say yes to at least one of them, that's an activity that you should seriously consider pruning and creating an opportunity either for more free time, which kids need more of these days. Human beings need free time. Kids in high school work much longer hours than I ever have as an entrepreneur at Collegewise. Even in the busiest times, in the earliest, leanest days of my business, I would be meeting with these students and hearing them talk about their schedules and looking at their resumes and saying, I don't know how you do this. I don't know how you're standing right now. But an example of what this might look like, we worked with a student years ago that was a football player, very successful football player, and he made varsity at his high school. His high school had won like 6 league championships in 10 years. They had a very serious coach. This was a big deal for them. If you're a football fan, it's the place where Carson Palmer, the former quarterback, went to high school. So he was a star football player. He was a starting middle linebacker who led the team in tackles as a sophomore. And one day when it was summer was coming up and our counselor was asking him, so you looking forward to another year of football? And he said, you know what? Not really. I'm really not. I don't really enjoy it that much. And our counselor said, oh, I didn't know that. Like, tell me more about this. And he said, you know, I led the team in tackles, and as a middle linebacker, your job is to go around and hit people. I got to be honest, I've thought a lot about this, and this was his exact wording. I remember this clearly. He said, I'm just not somebody who wants to be congratulated for trying to take somebody's head off. But he was worried about quitting, and that might look bad in terms of college admissions. First of all, quitting gets a bad rap. There's good quitting and there's bad quitting, right? And bad quitting is you leave a group high and dry because you bail out. But good quitting can be this activity. I was saying no to all three of these things. Successful people quit things all the time. They just quit the right things so they can focus on the things that will help them be more engaged and successful. So we talked with him about, if you could do anything else with that time, what would you want to do? And he was really into his church. He was committed to his church. And he said, I would really get more involved in my youth group. I think I could actually be a better leader than our current youth group leader. And that kid's going to be graduating next year. I'd spend more time doing that. And our counselor said, football, your answer is no to all three of these questions. Why don't you quit football? Talk to your parents about it first and go spend more time at your church. So he did that, and he made a huge impact at his church. And he ended up getting into his first choice college, which was Notre Dame, who inevitably, they would have appreciated him being a great football player, but Notre Dame is a Catholic college, and they also appreciated his commitment to his religion. So that's a great example of a kid who followed their instincts and went someplace where they could say, you know what? Now I'm saying yes to all three of these questions. So that's why we want to encourage students to look at their activities and see, do you have an opportunity to prune them? Our second thing I just talked about a little bit, second tip, is to make an impact. One of the phrases we hear all the time from our counselors who worked in admissions and from college admissions officers currently themselves is they are looking for high impact applicants. High impact is, what is the story behind the line on your resume? When you say this thing that I had this part-time job, or I was an Eagle Scout, or I did this volunteer opportunity, that's the line. The line itself never tells the whole story. The story behind it is, well, what was the impact that you made? What did you do while you were there that made it better? Made it better for the organization, for the people they serve, for the colleagues you were working with, for the students in the class, whatever it might be. We tell our people at Collegewise, I still do, 25 years later, I still do the orientation session for every new group of Collegewise hires that comes in. And one of the things I say to them in that first orientation is, every day at work, you either leave work at a little better or a little worse. You never leave work at zero. Our goal here is to make work a little better every day, because when we make it better for ourselves, for people around us, our students and our customers benefit from that. Well, that's sort of how a student can identify making an impact. What am I doing? What am I contributing, whether it's time or energy or ideas, commitment? What am I contributing to this activity that's actually making an impact and making it something that people would miss me if I weren't there? So questions to ask for students. They might say, when I join a class, does the class get a little better because I raise my hand and I contribute and I'm interested and the teacher can tell I'm interested? Or does it get a little worse? When I show up to a club meeting, when I do research with a professor at a local college, when I arrive at my part-time job after school, am I making it a little better or a little worse? Colleges are looking for the students who make things a little better. I mentioned Eagle Scouts just a second ago. That's an example of something that people ask us oftentimes. My son's an Eagle Scout, or he's going to be one soon. Is that going to help him get into college? Well, much like just about any activity, except maybe winning an Olympic gold medal, there's no activity that just the line itself automatically helps you get into college. Is being an Eagle Scout something worth doing? Absolutely, if the student answers yes to one of those three questions. But the real value is in the story behind it. We worked with a student years ago who was an Eagle Scout. And when we talked with him about, so we know what it means to be an Eagle Scout, and every college admissions officer knows what it means because they read about it in the essays that students write as part of their applications. I never went to a single meeting of Boy Scouts as a kid, but I know they have to do a service project. I know that's part of it, right? So that's absolutely worth being proud of. But we talked with this student about his time in being an Eagle Scout and how this had impacted him. And I still remember the first sentence of his college essay that he ended up writing, that he submitted to all of his colleges. It said, "Last summer, when I went to the beach with my friends, and my friend Clarissa stepped on a piece of glass that created a huge gash in her foot, every head turned to me. They knew I was the only one who knew what to do, and I'm the only student anyone has ever met who keeps a first aid kit in the trunk of my car." And he talked about this, like he said, like at the end of that first paragraph was, "After all, I'm an Eagle Scout, and be prepared is our motto." And he gave these examples of how all these lessons he had learned about leadership, about first aid, about navigation, all of these things as an Eagle Scout had really made an impact on him and the other people in his life. He said he had this great example of he had this friend, not Clarissa, but another girl that was just a friend of his. They weren't dating or anything like that, but he would go over to her house to see her. And the line he had in the essay is, "My friend Lisa swears that I am the only boy in the history of our family that my father ever says these words to. She's in her room, go on up." And he talked about what that means to him. He said one of the parts of a scout motto is a scout is trustworthy. And I have worked hard to earn that trust from my friends, from my teachers, from my parents, and from my friends' parents. That's the person I'm endeavoring to be. And the final example he shared was he was a cross-country runner. And this cross-country team over the summer planned a trip to the mountains so that they could train in high altitude. And he gave two great examples. He said, "We got lost on a run and had no idea how to get back, but I knew how to look at the angle of the sun and read the moss on the trees and figure out which direction we were supposed to go. And we ended up getting back in time." When he was doing his essay brainstorming meeting with his counselor, he said, "Oh, by the way, the year before that, the team never consulted me about how much food to bring, and we almost starved to death. Like, I was the person who knew from going on so many trips with my Eagle Scouts, like how much food you bring for this many people." So he had all these examples of impact that he makes. And again, this question that students can ask is, would they miss you if you stopped showing up? And if your answer is yes, I don't mean just miss you personally because they like you, that's part of it, but also like we would notice if you weren't there anymore. Well, then you're probably making an impact in that activity. And then my third example, this surprises a lot of people that this is a strategy for getting into college, but I'm going to substantiate this with some facts for you. It's a simple one. Be a good human. As parents, when we worry so much about when our kids are infants, we just, gosh, what do we do? How often are we supposed to feed them? How does this work? We're just trying to keep them alive. And then, you have all these responsibilities as they're getting older. It's almost like the world feels like it's changed so much that parents feel like we have to spend more time worrying about their grades and their test scores and their future and less time worrying about, am I just raising a nice kid who's good to their friends and good to their siblings and wants to do something positive in the world with their time that they have here? So a great example of this that happened just a few years ago, during the Little League World Series. It was the championship, two teams in the middle of the game. Now, the pitcher was starting to lose control, right? And if you've ever pitched, or if you have a kid who pitches, my 9-year-old is a pitcher, and the only thing that's more pressure than being a pitcher on the mound is being the parent of a pitcher on the mound, because when they lose their stuff and they're getting shelled and the batters are hitting over and over again, or they're walking people over and over again, there's nowhere to hide. You can't rely on your teammates. You are there on the mound all by yourself. Unless the coach comes and pulls you, you got to try to get through this on your own. Well, this pitcher in the Little League World Series, in a stadium full of people on national television, had lost his control, had lost his stuff. And he ended up hitting a batter in the helmet with the pitch. Now, the kid was fine because he's got a helmet on, but it knocked him down, kind of rung his bell a little bit, and he got up and went to first base. And that's when the pitcher started to break down. And he kind of looked down at the ground like this and put his head on his hand, on the top of his hat. And remember, this is on national television. There's all these people watching. It's the Little League World Series. He's only 12 years old. And he started to cry on the mound. And this batter that he had just hit, who is now on first base, turns to the first base umpire and says, "Timeout," and goes over to the mound and just gave this kid a hug and said, "Hey, it's all good. I'm good. I'm good. Hang in there. Keep your chin up." And went back to first base. Is it more important that you raise a kid who does this, or is it more important that you raise a kid who can get into Harvard? Well, I think it's a perfectly fair question to say, can't I raise both? I would really like to do that, right? Well, I'm going to be direct with you. If you've raised a kid who is not a good human, and I'll give some examples of what every parent thinks their kid is a good human, but I'm going to give you some examples in a minute. They're not going to get into Harvard, no matter how high their GPA and their test scores are. And here's why. Unfortunately, some families, some students treat the college admissions process like the end justifies the means. That whatever we have to do to get into those schools, we will risk anything. We will bear any pain of that to help us get to these goals. That can feel like an honorable thing to do. But for example, your student doesn't get an A in the class. And so the parent goes and marches into the teacher's classroom and demands that the teacher changes the grade or raises a stink with the school counseling office. Now, maybe you've been in a situation where honestly your student wasn't treated that fairly, but I'll give you a side tip now that wasn't part of this presentation. Never, ever, ever let your student tell a college, well, I didn't do well in that class because I had a personality conflict with the teacher. The college is always going to side with the teacher. Even if they don't know the story, they're going to think, well, we don't want you having personal conflicts with our professors once you get here. Another example, let's say a student embellishes their college application and takes that risk. It only takes one phone call, which happens all the time, from a college admissions officer to the school counselor to say, hey, I just wanted to verify that this was accurate here, what the student said, because it didn't really seem to fit with the rest of their application. That school counselor says, actually, no, that's not true. Well, you're not getting into that college. And if that dean of admissions knows deans at other colleges you're applying to, they're probably going to tell them, not because they have personal vendettas, but students embellish in their applications frequently. And it's not something that a good human does, right? Just because we should be being a good person first. What if a student has a disciplinary infraction for something they really did do wrong in high school? And instead of owning it and apologizing for it and learning from that experience, they just make all kinds of excuses. They make excuses on their application, or even worse, they try to hide that from the college, even when the college is outright asking, have you ever had a disciplinary infraction? That's raising somebody who has not learned to take responsibility for their own actions. No college is going to, well, especially the most selective ones are going to feel good about admitting that student to their school. So I don't want to make this sound like, oh, great, now we have to raise this perfect kid who doesn't just have perfect grades and perfect test scores. They can't ever make mistakes. Kids are supposed to make mistakes. In fact, high school kids are the only people who get this message that they have to be perfect, right? Like nobody at any of our jobs is expected to be good at things that aren't part of our jobs, right? Nobody says to this person who's a journalist, we expect you to be a great accountant too. But in high school, kids are expected to be able to do all of this. Mistakes are part of growing up for kids. Teenagers still need to be teenagers. And I can tell you, we have seen dozens and dozens and dozens of kids who had disciplinary infractions in high school who learned from that and were embarrassed about it and apologized to the people that were affected and were honest about it in their applications, and they were honest about it if a college interviewer asked them about it. And really, it reflects very well on them because they say, this is a kid who knows how to grow, who knows how to take responsibility. All of these things are examples of raising a good human, and that's the one part of being a parent that we all know how to do on day one, right? We all know what it means just to be a good person, just be nice, be somebody who cares about other people, be somebody who's not selfish and isn't just out for yourself. Yes, have high goals, pursue them vigilantly, absolutely do those things, but make a good contribution in the world. We all want to raise good kids. Colleges love admitting good kids. And when they say good kids, they're not talking about the GPAs and the test scores. And kids really need to have both, especially if they want to go to these selective colleges. So don't fall into that trap of thinking that, well, we'll just deal with the consequences of what we're trying to do here. It's worth it for us to get to this outcome. I said I would substantiate this with some facts. So the National Association for College Admissions Counseling does a survey of colleges across the country every year where they ask them to evaluate and share the relative importance of all the different parts of the college applications. What you're seeing here is that as schools become more selective, the character attributes of students become even more important. They are directly asking information from your counselors and your teachers, which I'll show you in a minute, about what kind of person are you. So the schools that care most about this are the ones that are admitting fewer than 50% of their applicants. It's the most selective ones. This is an example. The common application is an application that's accepted by more than 1,000 colleges. In fact, many colleges today, that's the only application they accept. They don't have their own. Your school counselor has to fill out a recommendation for you. They have to comment on your personal characteristics. Don't panic if you feel like I'm at a large public school, but the school counselor barely knows my kid. They know enough, right? They know that they could talk to teachers. They know if you've had the disciplinary infractions. They know those things. They don't expect the counselor to be able to give a detailed overview of exactly who your student is, but the personal characteristics matter. Many of the more selective colleges, in fact, I might go as far as to say most of them, especially the private schools, will ask for evaluations from your teachers. They are also asked to comment on your personal characteristics. This is the form that teachers have to fill out. Look at how many of these are about personal characteristics, because the college says, look, we can see your transcript. We know that you got an A in chemistry. We don't need a teacher to tell us that. What we need a teacher to tell us about are these other things. So these are elements that teachers are asked to comment on. You do not need to raise a student who is all the way over to the right on this for every one of these categories. And I think I can categorically say none of us have done that, right? I mean, it's kids are still human and they're teenagers. They're not who they're going to be yet, right? They're not fully formed. But if you want to raise a student who's going to get into the most selective colleges, they need to edge to the right on all of these things. And the reason why, those schools have, I mean, like magnitudes of more applications than they can possibly accept, including if it's a school like, Hansel mentioned Harvard, any of the Ivy League schools, Georgetown, Duke, Northwest, I mean, outside the Ivy League, Georgetown, Duke, Stanford, these schools, they've got, I mean, they reject valedictorians because we have so many of them. We can't take all of them, right? So how do they make this? How do they distinguish which of those kids to take? A lot of times it's because of the personal characteristics. If you'd like to learn more about this, not that you don't know how to raise kids, but honestly, like, what do I need to do as a parent, given the way life is today, to really encourage my kid in ways that are healthy? What can I do as a parent? One of the best sources I found is the book How to Raise an Adult. We've met this woman, Julie Lythcott-Hames. She's fantastic. If you don't want to read the book and you want to just watch her TED Talk on the same topic, I really encourage every parent to read it. She was a former dean of freshmen at Stanford who became concerned about the effects the admissions process were having on students and like how many of them were not focusing on their character attributes. And when on those rare occasions when one of those kids would slip through and end up at Stanford, they saw how much those kids struggled. So she wrote a book to really help parents see some really concrete steps you can take with your student to sort of drive home these lessons that are so important and use life's learning opportunities that are served up to them along the way, like when they make those mistakes. How do you react to that as a parent? She covers all of it in the book. We have no official connection to her. I don't get a kickback if you go buy the book at all. I just read the book and really like it, and I really liked her when I met her, and I just want people to know about her because I think it's a great resource. All right, so we've got these three strategies. Now, these might seem like, gosh, I thought I was really going to be getting, things that, seemed more secretive, right? It might be like apply under this major and tell them that you're left-handed, even if you're not. And then if you do that, then you'll be able to transfer into computer science. Let me just tell you this. If there were some sort of magic formula to getting into those schools, some secret path to take, someone would have found it and made $1 billion off it already, right? There is no secret path to take. There are absolutely things you can do to improve your chances. But as I said at the beginning, there is not a single college in the country that would not be very, very pleased to see a student come through, regardless of your grades and test scores, which are going to matter even more as you get to more selective schools, but they're going to care about this too, that any student who's done these things, I will promise you this, they're not just going to be successful in college admissions, they're going to be more successful in life. That, your character matters a lot, especially as we're in this world where we've got more and more people with educations, more and more people with experience, and companies are doing the same thing. They're calling you references before they hire you and say, like, what was it like to have this person on the team when they were there? It all starts to matter. So I'm going to share one last piece of advice with you, and then Hansel has a few closing words. Before I do that, my colleague Joe is going to put a survey up for you now. And the survey is just asking you, would you like us to reach out and tell you when Collegewise and or the Coder School are doing presentations like this in the future. You can opt out of that list at any time if you decide you don't want to be on it anymore, but we would love to be able to stay in touch with you. And it will also give you the opportunity to learn more about either one of our organizations if you'd like to do that. I also forgot to mention at the beginning that if you were signed up for this at all, even if you're not here right now, you are going to be getting the recording to this in the next 24 hours. So if you want to share this with your kids, or if anything I said was just so profound that you want to go back and listen to it again, well, you'll have the opportunity to do that. I think it's highly unlikely you're going to want to do that, but who knows? Maybe I really hit the home run for you here today. So my closing piece of advice before I turn it to Hansel. Kids today in college admissions, they're experiencing a crisis. There's a real mental health crisis for teenagers today. And a lot of it's not all about college admissions. There's social media, and the pressures of being a teenager today are very different than when I was a teenager. But this pressure of college admissions is driving a lot of it. And what I want to remind you is that kids should not have to choose between doing well and being well. I don't want to be too preachy to parents, because really we're all just, as I said, doing our best, right? I am far from a parenting expert. If you saw me with my kids in our house, you would not need me to admit that I'm not a parenting expert. But I am somewhat of an expert about parenting teenagers through the college admissions process, because I've watched 30,000 families do it. So I know what families tend to do that make the process more enjoyable, more productive, and ultimately more successful for their students. And for the parents who say, I want to raise a good kid, but I also want them to take their future seriously. I want them to be engaged in this. Going to college is important. It's not something we're just going to leave to chance. That is all healthy. But ultimately, if the parent says, but the single most important thing to me, even more than that, is that I raise a happy kid, a healthy kid, and that they feel comfortable being themselves. They know that they're loved in their homes, and that no matter what grade or test score or college admissions decision they get, that is not going to change. Final parting word, which I said at the beginning, what your student does in college will be much, much more important than where they do it. Life is long. It is a long road where these lessons about being a human and being a student can be put to use. And Hansel, I know you see this with kids at the Coder School every year. You're someone who's gone through the college admissions process. So love to hear any parting advice or parting words that you have for families before we close up here.
Yeah, listen, this was an amazing presentation. I've actually heard you do this before, actually before this one. And you almost made me excited to do my next set of college applications for my freshman in high school. Almost. But yeah, I really appreciate that. I know folks, a lot of this was a really great stuff from Kevin. Really kind of gets you excited. It wasn't very computer science oriented. It wasn't meant to be. In the future, in our next webinar in the series, we will be bringing on Collegewise as an expert in STEM. She, in fact, wrote the book on STEM at Collegewise, and we will be doing something that's a little bit more technical, a little bit more STEM and computer science oriented. So that's all I have to say. Kevin, is there something you want to do to wrap up? I don't know if you normally take questions or anything, or...
since we have just a few minutes, Joe, did you see any questions come through that you might think would be worth addressing here? I'm sure we got plenty of them, but sometimes it's hard to pick one that applies to the whole crowd, right? So we have to try to pick ones that are more universally applicable than they might be to just one student. Anything you think we should cover?
Yeah, I think one good one that is a really popular question that was asked by an anonymous attendee. How many extracurriculars should you do, just on average, for a good amount?
It's a great question. I don't think there is a magic number there, right? I think it depends a lot on the student's circumstances and their academic load. So I'll just say this. You want your student to get enough sleep. You want them to be happy. They need to spend time with their friends. They need to spend time with their family. They need to be able to have fun. These are all important elements to teenage development. By the way, my wife is a social worker who works as a therapist at a middle school, so I hear a lot about healthy teenage development, but I've seen it be true for the Collegewise kids. So rather than give you a number, I would just say this. Does your student have things to do after school and or on the weekends that they're excited about, that they feel like they're able to answer yes to all three of those questions? And are they spending what you would consider productive time doing those things, enough time to make that impact? Or are you seeing, well, no, they're not really doing that. They're doing like one or two things, but they spend a whole lot of time on YouTube and doing other stuff. And I feel like they could be a little more productive. Productive is a general term, but I mean, I see a lot of kids today, as I said, that are trying to be way too productive. So I think if you're asking the question, the chances are that you're concerned about the number, that they might not have enough. So instead of looking at the number, ask those 3 questions, prune the list of activities if necessary, and then this is the key, make an even bigger impact. Colleges don't care how many activities a student does. In fact, when they look at a long list of them, it's hard to tell like what the student actually cared about. They care much more about the impact the student makes than they do about the number of activities.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. And there's one just about the coding specific CS webinar. That date has not been set yet. So it will be sometime in March. We'll work on that and get that out. But yeah, and the link that I sent at the very bottom of the page, there is a something you can click on for webinars and be in the list for upcoming ones. So just sign that, and you should get that notice once it.
And when you get that invitation, even if you can't make it, register anyway, and you'll get the recording afterwards. So I think that's all we got. We really appreciate your time. Yeah, speakers always say thank you so much for being here. We genuinely mean that. When it's a Wednesday night, you have lots of other things you could be doing other than coming and listen to us speak. But Hansel and I felt a real responsibility to make this worth your while. We really hope that you did. And Hansel, I really want to say thank you for inviting us to do this with you. We're really looking forward to doing more work with you as a customer and as an organization and partner with the Coder School. I'm excited about it. Thanks so much for being here, everybody.
Great content. Thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate it.